I've got a lot of things that I need to make sure that I'm keeping in mind as I'm moving forward on these initiatives, because increasing engagement is great, but also making sure that the benefits package is balanced to where it's not all company sponsored is also important. So if we're going to add things to the benefits package, that doesn't necessarily mean everything has to be paid by the company. We could, by adding an FSA, that should be no increase to the company, because that's all just another option for the employee to choose. I was at one of the local law firms here. There was a very, very big issue with paralegals being taken off their vacation in order to be pulled into a trial. And the partners were like, well, we'll just give them a raise. We'll just give them more money. They should be fine with that. So we talked about the difference in what do people value? If people value their time off, then it doesn't matter how much money you give them.
Welcome to the Digible Dudes podcast. I'm David.
I'm Reid.
Today we are talking with Courtney. It's Galloway currently, but as of this weekend, it will be.
Are you quizzing me?
Yeah.
Do you not know?
I don't know. So we'll see if you get the quiz correct.
I will. It's right. Because I didn't get a chance to make a joke about, what a transition that was for Miranda, my wife, because she went from Joyce to Wicoff. So, that was not pleasant for her on multiple levels. But I was just going to tell Courtney, feel lucky that, she's just going from Galloway to Wright. Easy to pronounce, nice and clean. Same thing for you and Nicole. So I'll be curious to see how that all shakes out for my daughters. I don't think any of them will be eager to be holding on to that maiden name, but
you think there's something against the Wicoff?
Well, no, it's not about rolling off the tongue, but it's not the same as a Joyce or say a Staley. I mean, maybe it's my own, I don't know if I call it insecurities, but just having laughed at that last name for.
It's interesting. Yeah. I was
especially growing up.
I don't want my parents to take offense if they probably don't even know we have a podcast, but when Nicole and I were doing, I was like, why should you have to change and not me? I was like, let's just make let's do a new one. What do you want to be called? And she was not into it. She wanted to stick a little bit more to the tradition. But no, Wyckoff's great because it's it's unique. I have met other David Staleys. Have you met other Reid Wycoffs?
Yeah, I think we both know the answer.
There you go.
Yeah.
So there's something to
like
it.
My mom.
Yeah.
That's good. You're already settling into the parent perspective.
Yeah. Better and worse, right? Because it's now you can't hide. It's when they Google Reid Wycoff, they get one guy.
Yeah. That was the problem for us when we started the business.
Yeah, it was. Yeah.
Yep.
Well, Courtney is our director of employee experience, which we're super excited. And just to set perspective, many people think of her role as HR, which there is an HR component, but we're deliberately calling it employee experience because we don't want her, as she even starts off, I think the episode, she doesn't want to just collect complaints. She wants to be in here to continue to push the employee experience to bigger heights.
Yeah. And I don't think I squeezed this question in, but I brought it up right before we jumped on with her. It was just, is this in itself a trend? I mean, certainly we know the experience title in some form is a trend. We didn't start that, we kind of came after the fact, but are more HR directors, adding some skill set, rounding things out so that they can fill these roles, or is it more coming from you asked her about recruitment, or I don't know, something that sits adjacent to that, or are these kind of coming bottoms up right now, meaning certainly you'd expect that they'd have some of that background, but I'm just curious about how it all came together and where and what we should expect moving forward. Are more and more companies going to be adopting this, and then how are they going to recruit, for these types of positions? So, but I love the way as you said, she's like, I'm not here just to, gather complaints, and she was very eloquent, as I used that word a few times, and how she was kind of categorizing, I think, the employee experience. And she's just been a terrific addition, and look forward to as things slow down a little bit for her, because she's definitely getting hit with a lot, the kind of strategy and kind of vision that she's going to start to put together for us.
Yeah, we're so fortunate to get her, and I know she's under 90 days in, but the impact has been felt I felt it.
Felt like day one.
Yeah. And she, I mean, the way that she pulled together her list of here's all of Digible's risks and here's the threat level and urgency, like, was incredible. Most people, you hope, hey, in 100 days, I hope you can pull together the list. And she had the list in like the first couple of weeks.
Yep.
So we're so lucky. Quick segue, I guess. You mentioned like the titles, and we both have read some of Scott Galloway's books, Professor Galloway. And I remember I was listening to an interview with him a couple months back, right as like the whole OpenAI thing was hitting, and he was talking about how he expects more and more companies will start having a chief AI officer. And so I'm using that as a quick jumping off thought experiment. Are there any positions that you see that will be invented in the next, let's say, 5 years or before the end of the decade where you got to have one of those?
Well, yes. I mean, I've probably been as vocal as anyone about how much I expect our org to change and all the new positions I personally wasn't familiar with. I think we didn't make any of those up, like, but I just wasn't acquainted with them, like the implementation manager, delivery manager. Part of that is because you and I didn't come from tech companies or, product companies. And so it's been an education for both of us. But, I know you laugh, and rightfully so, at the title that I had given one of my reports post of, I think, vice president of disruptive innovation or something. I could throw kind of crazy stuff like that out there, but honestly, I chief AI, like, I could see that. I don't know if that will exist here at Digible, but I see more what we have with Courtney, which is I probably wouldn't have told you 6 years ago, director of employee experience. I don't even know if I would have brought it up CXO, but where two positions are melding or fusing, and it creates, a new title. So I think the chief AI, just using that one as an example, I doubt that they wouldn't come with some strong technical background, if not a CTO or a CDO, right? And then it's like, well, now there's enough need, business demand, and kind of looking ahead, that we're going to go ahead and call this chief AI, and it is a different expectation than a CTO or a CDO. So I expect more of that. I mean, you're putting me on the spot, which you like to do, but I can't say that I know where those are going to exist at Digible specifically, like where we're going to start maybe combining and then inventing a new title.
Yeah, I think it's important to set perspective there, because as I think internationally, there's all these, you and I have run across them before, where it's like president of European operations. And so like if you're a big enough company, you start having different presidents of different areas, or even like CEO of European operation, blah, blah, blah. So it's important to set perspective, because do I think a car wash is going to have a, CAI? Yeah, whatever. Chief AI officer. No, right. So there is definitely, that's important. And then think about a company like Digible size. It's fun to think about, to say like, okay, how would that morph? Because if I almost thought about reframing the question of which of the current pretty standard positions might change and morph. So for example, will CFO still be called the CFO in 5 years, or will the more I don't know, forward leaning companies start to morph it into something else? It's really just interesting to think about. But
yeah, I would love to, I guess, Google that. What does today's C-suite, like, how many are there? Because if you rewound 20 years ago, you might see less than 10. And now I honestly would wager 20 to 30 minimum. Somehow this fits into when we got onto that thread about our values and our compensation and kind of experience reflecting that. I feel like you see that that's fair with titles in a way, and that's why people make some of those choices. Is they want, and we said that it was intentional with the CXO with Nicole, is that we wanted to really highlight what a priority that is for us versus leaving her as, or whatever, chief client services or chief revenue officer or whatever. We wanted to make sure that people saw the commitment we were making there. So I think that there's some marketability or value, like in the title itself.
Yeah, I can't think of who to give attribution to for this, but there's another interview I was listening to on my drive in last week, and they were sort of like going off on how titles have just gotten away from us. And specifically, they were saying, hey, 25 years ago, you did not have 30-person companies with a C-suite. Like you might have had a director of operations, but you did not have a COO. And what they were blaming a lot of this on was the .com bust. They said in the early 2000s when this happened, you had all these companies with $100 billion valuations, and all of these young these folks with young talent that had been promoted to VPs or C-suite because they had founded X $100 million company. Then the stock market busts, their company goes away, and now other companies are trying to recruit them and say like, well, I would take a person from AOL before the merger or something, but to get them, I have to give them now this like C-suite title, even though I'm a 40-person company. And so they're blaming, it's like a residual wave impact of how now, like basically they're saying like the C-suite title does not mean what it used to mean, and director doesn't mean what it used to mean because they've just started to be given out like candy without any real requirements.
Interesting. I'm sure that is right. I just would love to again take a snapshot of a handful of companies like 20 years ago, pre bubble or .com bust, and see what those orgs look like. Again, I'm sure you're right, but how did they present themselves? I guess like for us, one of the things that was important, I just mentioned the marketability, the optics, but if everybody is a manager or whatever,
Yeah.
it's like, well, who is running the show, or do you have any real authority, or do you have any real experience? So I feel like I don't want to say we fell victim to that. It was deliberate, but also like there's some divisions or senior leadership that you have to start up top, and then it will be built out. And so it's like, well, what do you do there? If it's like, I'm going to bring in, I'll mention Alex, head of product. It's like, he doesn't have a team of 20 yet, but we went ahead and did that. Didn't that exist 20 years ago? It seems like it on some level.
Super fascinating. And this does tie into the conversation we just had with Courtney. So I'm sure we already mentioned that we want to get her back for some other episodes, including one with John Olafson, who we had on about 18 months ago. So I hope you guys get something out of the episode, but I enjoyed, I haven't gotten a lot of time with Courtney yet. When I do, I always learn something new. So I hope they enjoy it.
Yeah, I think we tried to find some applications, mostly at the end there, to property management, apartments, but there's all sorts of value, I believe, in just how she was kind of framing things related to the employee experience, kind of categorically walking us through that. That would be helpful if you're any kind of hiring manager or certainly senior leader.
All right.
My name is Courtney Wright, formerly Courtney Galloway, newly married. I am the Director of Employee Experience here at Digible, and I have about 5 or 6 years of HR experience and tons of administrative experience beyond that. So, very excited to be able to jump in and help bring your vision to fruition.
Which I think we're handing the vision off to you, so you can have the vision and bring it to fruition.
Awesome. Well, my vision is honestly just to make the best employment experience that we can for the folks that we hire. So I'm very excited to be able to partner with you all to define what that is going to be.
Cool. Well, take us back a little bit. You mentioned HR experience, employee experience. Would you say your background is then more HR or more on the experience side? What's been more recent addition to your toolbox?
The most recent addition has definitely been the HR experience. So I started my career as an insurance agent and had various experiences after becoming an insurance manager, which led me down the path of wanting to actually impact the HR policies, training, and be able to promote real change within an organization rather than just collecting complaints, which a lot of traditional HR folks are known to do. So yeah, that's really my most recent experiences with HR.
It's
Yes.
almost like a suggestion box where all the complaints go, and that's
Yes.
what it's a collection.
Yeah.
Yes.
I just got a kick out of the irony of that as an insurance agent, like trying to move forward from all the complaints. That's kind of what the whole gig is about.
Yeah. Was it?
I know you mean it a different way.
Yeah.
That's what I was getting a kick out. Sorry.
Would you say the insurance? Were you dealing with companies that were coming to you as an agent and saying, "Hey, I have this problem. Am I covered?" or what was the thing that spawned it? If so, because I want to dive into like what some of those complaints were like.
Mostly it was, so I started my career as a Medicare specialist. So I specialized in insurance specifically for folks that were eligible for Medicare. And then I went into employee benefits where I was working with companies, designing their benefits packages and figuring out specific issues with carriers and designing the best benefits package for that company. So most of the issues we were running into were just a lack of understanding or a lack of education between what the staff actually wanted and what the owner wanted to do. And so I was there to help bridge that gap.
Give us an example. That sounds juicy.
Yeah, so like one of the most recent examples was having an FSA match. So that sounded great to the owner. They're like, "Yeah, we're going to give you $500 every year. We'll match that." But to the employees, they're like, "That money disappears every year. That's not great for me. That's just that just is kind of just money there, and if I'm forced to use it, great, but if I don't have anything to use it on, then it just disappears."
Mm-hmm.
So that was just a lot of conversation between the staff and the owner to figure out, well, what would be advantageous? What would make this investment actually useful for the employees?
And what were the employees asking for then instead?
Commuter benefits. So a lot of them commuted to work. So instead of the FSA investment, we switched that into an RTD pass that the company sponsored.
That's super interesting. Do you think? Well, I guess what is the right cadence then on this topic as far as how much the owner or management should be setting? Like, well, we want to encourage this behavior, so let's make this policy versus almost from the ground up the troops are asking for this.
I think there's a fine balance there. I think the most important thing is for the senior leadership team or the owners to decide what their approach to benefits is going to be and then go from there. Because if the approach is we want our to be really competitive in the recruiting market, we want to give our employees the feeling that they are very well taken care of at the company, then it can be very much from the ground up. So that way we hear from the employees and we know what they need. But if it's on the other side where it's we are going to be heavily focused on salary, very not very much focused on benefits, then that's a top-down decision.
Hmm. Well, I've got one more, and then I'm sure Reid will want to dive into this too. But one of the other companies that you're most recently with, you guys are, I can't remember the name, but you were super fast growing,
Hmm.
right? And you guys added like quadrupled or so the staff in like a year, some short period of time. So what changed in this instance from, I don't know, when there were 50 employees versus 200 employees? Because that as you add more people, the wants change and the blah, 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 blah. So if you could give us any background or what you're willing to share, and then, dive into that.
A lot of things changed. Our culture changed in the sense of what was acceptable as far as what was communicated. So we were used to moving very fast, used to making a lot of decisions. But as we grew and also eventually got acquired, we realized that we had to start putting things in place in a much more specific and structured manner rather than just kind of flying by the seat of our pants and just making decisions as we go, or as our CEO used to fondly say, we were laying the railroad tracks as we were moving. So we kind of had to stop the train and then lay the tracks ahead.
Yeah. Well, just to finish that off. So, what was it, 50 to 200? What was the growth?
It was 17 to 43. So not quite
Okay,
that
okay.
extreme.
So
Yeah.
yeah, maybe I'm thinking of Kelly because I think she had something like that. But with the 17 to 43, still those first 17
Hmm.
are their needs. Like they may or may not care about the RTD
Hmm.
thing, right? Versus the 43.
Hmm.
So, and maybe that then depends on the level of the employee that you're bringing in. Like if you're bringing in a lot of frontline workers, maybe they'd care about tuition reimbursement or like tuition loan reimbursement or
Hmm.
something. Versus if they tend to be more mature in their career, they may care more about like a daycare,
Hmm.
allowance or something. Um, so I could just, I just, it seems very complex as far as how do you try to incentivize? It's almost like you want to incentivize the staff to take certain behaviors similar to a 401k match, like what we offer. You want to incentivize them for that, but at the same time, there's also the reality of the population and what they will care about. So in the early days, we were offering health benefits to our staff, and they just didn't really seem to value that very much. But many of them were still on their parents' insurance, so they didn't see the value in it. Now, as our staff has matured and we've grown, and we have more parents on staff, they care way more about what those healthcare benefits look like. So that's why I was trying to get the breakdown of, is it almost like a 50-50 split or not?
I think that's my previous company. It was very much there wasn't a lot of focus on what the employees wanted until I got there. So we started a communications and culture committee. The communications part of that was so that way we could set proper expectations for what the expectations were going to be from the employees as far as communication and what they could expect from the senior leadership team. And the culture part of that was for them to have an open and safe space to let me know, well, these are the cultural things that we would like to see change, or these are the things that have been proposed that have been dropped. So we really just met as a committee once a week, where I was able to really hear from the staff in a very candid way.
Cool. Reid, what's your take?
As you said, lots of questions, thoughts here. One for me that I have right now for Digible, and when I say right now, I'm going to try and be patient, but is all the things that we are doing, what impact are they having? So, we do a fairly good job, I think, of kind of pulse checks, even on a weekly basis with employees to see where their happiness sits. But that doesn't always point to benefits per se. We're trying to get better at what happiness looks like, and that's frankly very individualized, right? So it makes it challenging when it's like, hey, did these fringe benefits that we introduced, or the travel incentive, or the increased 401k match, et cetera, that we've put together really landing? Or as David said, in the early stages, even with healthcare, it didn't seem like, maybe we were getting the credit that we thought we might, as an early stage bootstrap company. So my question in there, and I don't know if you had any experience with this at that last company or just general thoughts, but how do you do the check-ins to know whether you're finding that right balance? And I would assume that it has to start with, what does success actually look like? There's so many variables when it comes to retention and acquisition of talent. So it again makes it hard. You often can't just say, well, we rolled out these benefits and now our retention rate's higher, therefore we must have gotten this right. So I just didn't know if you had any thoughts about the KPIs, metrics, way to kind of wrestle that ROI, so to speak, down to the ground when it comes to enhancing the employee experience, bringing more benefits, bringing them into the conversation. What should we really be looking at to know whether we got it right?
I think that's a twofold question. One, we need to be
I thought it
looking
was an
at.
eightfold question. I'm notorious for those, Courtney, but I'm glad you see it as just two. Maybe you're right.
Well, maybe I've only got two parts of the
No,
answer.
it's great. I'm sure you're right. Go ahead.
I think it's important that we look at engagement levels, because we've got some plans where we've got really low engagement and some where there's really high engagement. And then from there, asking the probing questions and figuring out, well, are people using this plan because it's the cheapest plan, or does it have the best benefits? But also making sure that we give proper education to our employees for what's available. I was just talking about this with the employee experience team earlier this morning about what type of plan education or benefits education would be useful, because maybe someone doesn't understand the difference between FSA and HSA, and therefore they don't know that that could be beneficial to them. So I think the first part is checking for engagement, and that would be with either an employee satisfaction or engagement survey. And then the second piece is actually educating the employees about what's available and what those plans mean.
Yeah.
It's odd. I mean, we've said this before, but Reid mentioned we rolled out a bunch of fringe benefits last year. I can't remember. Do you remember directionally, Reid, kind of what the value to the employee was on those fringe benefits if they leveraged 100% of them?
Yeah, it was somewhere in the neighborhood of 10 to 15%. Like if you're talking about what my current compensation is pre all those benefits and now what it looks like.
So it
So
increased. It's like
outside of salary, it was bolstered the value of their comp plan by about 10 to 15%.
Right. So it's let's just take the lower end, even say 10%. Let's say the average employee makes 70 grand or something. Then that means you got 7,000 in benefits if you're leveraging them. So to Digible, that's a big hit when we're like factoring and modeling, right? About a 10% basically salary increase, if you think of it that way, just cost increase of an employee. And yet then let's say Courtney comes in and she says, actually, people are using about 1.5%. So in a way, like her goal is to get people to leverage, get closer to the 10%. But then for us, we're like, oh shoot, man, our expenses just skyrocketed. So I guess Courtney, maybe talk about how that might get balanced between the company and the employees. Because obviously there's a purpose behind Fringe benefits and why we did it. But at the same time, if you're not careful, and let's say that Digible, like whatever, it's like we're modeling that, only 1.5% are going to get used in future years. Let's say that Ryan just took it and moved it forward, and in reality you 4x it the engagement, but now all of a sudden Digible's upside down. like we're actually like no longer profitable because you were so successful.
I think this speaks to the balance in the way that administrative functions need to work to support a company. I think that speaks to, like, I've got a lot of things that I need to make sure that I'm keeping in mind as I'm moving forward on these initiatives, because increasing engagement is great, but also making sure that the benefits package is balanced to where it's not all company sponsored is also important. So if we're going to add things to the benefits package, that doesn't necessarily mean everything has to be paid by the company. We could, by adding an FSA, that should be no increase to the company, because that's all just another option for the employee to choose. So I think that making sure we have that balance between the company expenditures and just what we're offering as a company is really important.
Well, and then going back to where you said matching, imagine if on those Fringe benefits we had said, hey, we offer 10%. And we match dollar for dollar what you spend. But that way it's not, I think like one of the Fringe benefits is a gym membership. And so it's like, yeah, but you have to dollar up $50 and then we match the $50. That would have been a way to control it, right? Because then there's it's not just like 100% gifted the whole way through. Because right now there's not actually much incentive for, like, an employee could buy a gym membership, use our reimbursement program, and yet they never go to the gym, and there's no reason for them to ever cancel it. No skin off their back. No reason I should cancel it. So by having them match, it would prevent things like that, where it's like, okay, yeah, let's do a culling. It's almost of like your streaming channels or something, right? Like, I don't use this channel anymore. Let me pull that one off.
Speaking of administrative work,
Yeah.
that would be a lot to manage.
Yes.
Well, it's a lot to manage if it's pulling it out, but what I'm saying, it's less to manage if it's like you would think the employee doesn't want to spend $50 of their own on a gym that they don't go to. So in a way, they're self-policing, right?
Yeah,
Theoretically.
potentially, yeah.
Yeah. If there are behaviors that we want to incentivize, we could definitely back into it and create some programs that are a little more creative. That's one of my goals with the Fringe benefits, is looking at, well, who's using this? What does that look like? And working with you all to figure out, well, what is the overall goal here with this program? Because I've got a lot of people who have given me feedback and say how great it is and how they love it, but they also have no idea what it could look like in other places, since we've got so many young professionals.
Yeah, well, I don't know if this is the right place to insert this or ask it, but what's trending right now? So several years ago, I feel like Fringe benefits didn't even exist 20 years ago or even 15. I don't know when that category of benefits really started to surface, but it's evolved pretty quickly and it's gotten really competitive. And I just last year, I think, looked at a few job descriptions for some positions we were hiring, and I could not believe how long the list was. Frankly, a lot of those lists sometimes actually feel a little shallow, but they're they're good for optics and they're marketable. But yeah, I don't know if you feel like there's some clear kind of trends happening within Fringe benefits, because you hear a lot of folks now at a high level talking about mental wellness, physical wellness, etc. And then David mentioned the gym membership. That's what I was going to say, is kind of maybe one of the OGs of Fringe benefits. But have you learned or heard, as you mentioned, our employees haven't been exposed to as much of some new or creative or different kind of Fringe benefits that have started to take root?
Well, I think that's very company specific. What I found when I'm like communicating with my HR counterparts is that most companies are creating benefits specific to their employee population. Like a lot of companies have like pet benefits, like that would be something that maybe we could look into here as a pet friendly company. Or a lot of companies are also looking into a lot of childcare benefits with all of the changes that happened during the pandemic and a lot of the stressors that have been placed on working parents. A lot of companies are leaning towards childcare benefits.
So would it be fair to say the trend would be customization?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And we talked about that, Dave and I did, because not that he was advocating for himself and Nicole, but obviously with a new kid, and we had a few new parents at Digible. He mentioned daycare as one of the things we might want to explore, like some sort of stipend, related to that. My comment back or reaction to that was, that's awesome. What actual percentage of Digible are parents or would need that? Kind of getting to your point, like that's critical that you
Mm-hmm.
understand that, because if you don't have a cutoff point, right, where it's like at least 25% of the staff
Yeah.
would benefit from that, then good intentions can, I don't want to say go awry, but maybe not land as well as something that has, uh, well, just connects with more people in the office. But this gets also a little bit to David's maybe suggestion about, he said matching, but
Mm-hmm.
how to orchestrate, like what level of customization could you deliver? So if you had this one use case at Digible that included a want or desire for daycare,
Mm-hmm.
as well as, they're trying to prioritize more of their mental health, you know, if that has, if somebody's figured that out where you could get down to an individual with a fringe benefits package, which I guess would just be some sort of elective,
Mm-hmm.
process versus what I'm saying would, which is there's cutoffs, before you deploy, a certain type of benefit. Where it's like if we don't have 25% or more of the staff that really wants this, then we probably shouldn't like support it.
Yeah, I agree with that. I usually when I'm doing benefits evaluations, I look at least 50% of the staff should be benefiting from any benefits change. So, like, if I'm going to propose any changes to the benefits package at Digible, you'll receive information about, okay, we've had X amount of people request this, or we'll also include some data about recruiting, how many candidates expressed an interest in this or a dissatisfaction with the lack of this. Because numbers don't lie. And if we add a benefit that is not helpful, then it's just going to be no engagement, like with the FSA match that I mentioned.
Well, this is why I said it's important to understand the goal of even an in particular a particular benefit. And because to your point about 50% of the staff, the reason I was recommending um, childcare is I was thinking, hey, let's start trying to recruit more folks that are a little bit further along in their career versus we were super heavy of folks straight out of college.
Mhm.
And so I was like, by putting a benefit like that together, you are now like, marketing to that audience that's just a little bit further along. And that's so half the staff wouldn't use it, of course not, but that it was more about like a marketing tool, almost to your point, to recruit. So I can understand though, like I think it's a good rule of thumb to have the 50%, maybe if you're changing your current stuff, because that leads into
Mhm.
my next question, which is I imagine as you join a company, there's a lot of unwinding that you have to do.
Mhm.
And so, and let's say that to your point, like a third of the staff uses the gym membership. At that point, that's below your 50% mark.
Mhm.
So do you recommend like could see you recommending pulling that back and replacing it with something else, but how do you actually manage those expectations? Because now a third of the staff you could really tick off because you're like you're removing this thing that I like depend on.
Mhm. I think it's really important for the overall employee experience that people never feel like something's being removed from them. So in that in that example, we would either change the gym membership to be a more general benefit, similar to like either work from home stipend, or changing it to be like an internet reimbursement since everyone uses internet at home, so it's a little more equitable. But as far as making sure that it's like the people understand the decision, that's where just transparency comes in because A company's not going to be able to make 100% of the employee population happy, but we can create trust and increase rapport if the decision is transparent and people understand the why behind it.
Yeah, I think that's super helpful and healthy to do. And the not that's where I always get afraid with providing benefits, meaning when have we gone too far and how do we walk it back? So that is very challenging. Like you said, it's very challenging to ever walk something back. And at some point, you run out of the internet reimbursement options. Or like, let's say that you do the analysis and you're like, shoot, this 10 to 15% that Reid mentioned, we gotta actually pull this back altogether because it's like we would be upside down if you were successful and had 100% engagement. So that walk back, I understand the trust makes a big impact there. And it also speaks to back to why are you offering a particular benefit? Because Reed and I had talked about before, why not just give cash? Like why
Mhm.
even say it's for gym or it's for internet? You could just give cash, but there's a reason that you do this because hopefully you get a greater value out of saying you can buy. I think at one point we had like whatever book you wanted to buy, you can just get
Mhm.
a reimbursement on that. And that's because we wanted to like, encourage learning, and self-development, which is different than like, hey, we gave everybody $20 now extra in their paycheck each month.
Yeah. Very, very different. We ran into this when I was at one of the local law firms here. There was a very, very big issue with paralegals being taken off of their vacation in order to be pulled into a trial. And the partners were like, well, we'll just give them a raise. We'll just give them more money. They should be fine with that. So we talked about the difference in what do people value? If people value their time off, then it doesn't matter how much money you give them. Then they're going to be upset if they lose their time off. So I think that speaks to the customization piece where we've got to know what our employee population values.
Well, something else that I think a lot of employers struggle with is how to communicate the value. I mean, as David was just kind of putting me on the spot, like, what does that really look like if you were to convert that into, a comp? Um, how effective? I don't want to say, are you seeing us right now? But I'm not afraid to ask that question. But in kind of promoting, and that I don't know if that's the right choice of words, but the value of these benefits. So sometimes when we have an employee come and say, "Hey, I've been approached by another company and they're offering me, another 15%, on and as much as I want to stay here, like, and we had said when we rolled that out like last year, meaning all these kind of enhancements, that we wanted to have almost a calculator, to help them fully grasp that.
Mhm.
It's not the same as cash though. And so the overall value might present itself as X, but unless they are engaging with it, they see true value in it. They may not have the same interpretation of the value as the employer does. But I'm just wondering, how effective do you think employers are or typically have been in
Hmm.
communicating the full value of their job?
I think that honestly is up to the direct manager. Because the company can produce as much information, as much resources as we possibly can, but each individual's experience of a company always comes down to their experience with their direct manager. So if the direct manager is expressing value in the benefits and showing that they also see value in the benefits, I think that goes a long way. Because if an employee is expressing dissatisfaction with their role or their pay, that's right when that conversation should start is okay, well, let's talk through your total compensation plan. And I'm also open to do that with any manager. We can create that calculator and go over it, but I really do think it starts with the direct manager to set that value and get the employee excited about the benefits that are being offered or any of the future plans for benefits.
Yeah, totally. Quickly coming back to David's comment though about why not just give them cash, and I know he and I align on this, and so did Nicole. As founders, it was really important for us that the benefits we did offer lined up with our core values to a degree, hopefully to a large extent. But that's a big part of the decisions I think you make as employers is, what do we really want to support advocate for. One of the things that David brought forward was the financial advisement, which I thought was terrific. And part of that was our own experiences or lack thereof, I'll say, in our early jobs, is that we didn't get a whole lot of advice or counseling on that.
Mhm.
And so we felt passionate, in particular David did, about bringing that forward into the company. And I think that's kind of connecting with what you just said. It's like, are the managers really understanding, and how are they positioning this so that it's more than just what is the monetary value.
Mhm.
There's kind of a story behind it, and I think that starts, frankly, when we hire somebody. And we're still working on that. Even you see it more and more now, of course, in our offer letters, but are we really telling some stories kind of behind that to make it more inspiring, I guess.
Mhm.
It's super interesting because I do agree with you, Courtney, that the manager should be in charge of retaining their team and recruiting talent. However, obviously there's you, director of employee experience, and then you have a recruiter as well.
Mhm.
And so maybe I'll use that example and then come back to the benefits thing.
Mhm.
Meaning, when we hired Kelly as a recruiter, we said, "Hey, this does not abdicate responsibility from the manager. That needs to. It's their job to fill their team out. If they need 10 people and they have 9 people, they need to go get 10. But Kelly is there to help you get
Yes.
that 10th. But you can't now just point fingers and be like, well, Kelly didn't give me that person. So now why that's interesting to me, because I think all of our managers would be surprised if you came to them and said, "Hey, did you know it's your responsibility to communicate the benefits to your employees?" I think they would be terrified. Right? They'd be like, "How am I supposed to know the healthcare plan? And how am I supposed to know like all the like they're like, I'm not HR." So that seems like it's a heck of a project if or maybe it's you first delineating, here's what my expectation is on that for you all versus for yourself, because you're the one picking the
Mhm.
healthcare plan, right? So you should know it better than anybody, but
Mhm.
you have to give them the tooling in order to like communicate
Yes.
the benefit.
Yes, I 100% agree. I will definitely be providing the tooling and the resources and education to the managers. But as far as making sure that employees understand the value, I can only do so much from the HR or employee experience perspective to impact how an employee will see the value of the benefits. So that I 100% agree that I need to work with the managers and make sure to set that expectation, but also make sure they're comfortable with that conversation beforehand.
Hmm. Yeah, I think, and yeah, it's gonna be a long road for them to maybe get comfortable for that. Because even on the executive team,
Mhm.
sometimes we struggle to communicate. As I asked Reid, what's the value of the benefits all in? And previously, when I first learned that number, I was using it, meaning when it was just healthcare before fringe benefits, I was like, it's like 19% as far as like employee burden on us. So like we pay 19% more, and then it's like now if it's another 10%, it's like 29% like above
Yeah.
employee burden that we're giving you. So, but I want to walk it back a second because to the why not give cash? Because Reed and I and Nicole had that debate. Why even offer health care versus just giving them? If you give an employee $10,000 more in salary, they like recruiting them and staying. The number one thing they do when they're looking at other job offers is look at salary. And if all of a sudden their salaries are all increased by 10 grand, it sort of like swats a lot of those like
Mhm.
distractions away. But as he was pointing out with core values, we thought it was very important to guide people to be like, you should totally have health insurance. Because if we, what if we didn't like give them health insurance and they were like, I'm going to keep my 10 grand, not buy health insurance, and then something catastrophic happens? That's not good for them, and it's also not good for us because, maybe they don't want to go buy antibiotics and they need it now. They're out for 3 weeks for being ill or whatever. So that's how we ended up landing on let's go ahead and provide some of these benefits versus going straight up cash. Although
Mhm.
there are definitely times when people start, you know, you know, raising the flag about their salary and what they're getting offered elsewhere. And it's like, oh, did that other company have health care? Or do they have this or do they have that? And they're like, well, no. It's like, but the seed's already planted in their head of like this new high watermark of
Mhm.
salary. And you can't like erase that high watermark that they now have in their head, even when you talk about it. It's like we as Digible are on the back foot at that point. Well, to your point, if we tooled everybody up and they felt really comfortable with the true value of their total package, then when someone comes buzzing at them on LinkedIn, they can be like, yeah, well, do you have
Mhm.
this? Okay, I'm not going to talk to you.
Yeah. I think that it was great for you all to model the fringe benefits after the core values of the company because, like, just from my perspective, when I was looking at Digible and a couple of other offers, those benefits showed me what was important to Digible and that the employee experience was important. And that's something that I cannot say for every company that I've worked at. And so by just giving money, that doesn't really show an employee what's important to the company. But by
Mm.
differentiating, we want to focus on mental wellness, physical wellness, making sure that you have a travel benefit. It shows what's important to the company.
Yeah, in a way, if you do go, and I won't name names, but David will know who I'm talking about, a little heavier on salary and leave out the fringe benefits, it's almost a tell to me, like what they prioritize,
Hmm.
right? It's like you guys are coming at me really monetarily. That must be your own focus
Hmm.
versus kind of a bigger vision and broader, not broader, but values beyond money.
Hmm.
Um, so uh, I want to pivot if we can, maybe use this as an opportunity to talk about other elements of the employee experience. So, beyond benefits, what else is trending right now? The term we heard that we've been using for a little while, and I still don't know if I have this right as far as the roots of psychological safety, but that was a big outcome from this Project Aristotle with Google years ago when they were trying to identify the top performing teams. What was the secret sauce? What was the common denominator? And they had said beyond just work ethic, I guess intelligence, skill set, et cetera, that the psychological safety was really paramount. And that's not just feeling comfortable to speak up, but in a way feeling the burden, like a positive burden, an obligation,
Hmm.
so that you're holding each other accountable and that you're always trying to improve. So maybe that's a good jumping off point for you because it seems now. Yet last week we heard a great lunch and learn from John Olafson talking about DEIB, which that would to me be another thing that you might bring up as far as the employee experience. But he highlighted that engagement kind of paradigm and said psychological safety was really um, in the center of that. So why don't you lay it on us? What are some of the other things that you feel like more recently have become really high priorities as it relates to the employee experience? What creates a great experience? What should companies be striving for beyond putting together a good benefits package?
Beyond benefits, I think it's important to actually think about the employment experience holistically. And I think John did a great job of illustrating how DEIB initiatives, they speak to the whole employment experience and not just to marginalized populations. And I love how he described that everyone is diverse. We are all different. We are all diverse individuals, but that does not mean we are all marginalized. So I think it's important for employers to think through, well, what type of employee experience do I want to create within the company, and then work backwards from there. So in addition to DEIB initiatives, that could be thinking through, well, do we have enough support for every function within the company? Does everyone feel psychologically safe enough to speak up? Because you can't really have an innovative culture if people are not speaking up about things. That means there are ideas that are going unsaid, there's feedback that's not being given, and that could mean lost revenue or even just going the wrong direction for a long time because someone didn't speak up.
Yeah, well, I'm sure you have a few questions or could unpack that a little bit further, which is what I'd like to do. So, the psychological safety, did you interpret any different than I had described it? And how do you think you, I guess, foster psychological safety? And I'm not trying to be Captain Obvious here. I really do think this is not as easy as people might assume in creating an environment that has more psychological safety. And then maybe we can come back to DEIB because you guys actually made me aware right before the podcast of some a new judgment. Unfortunately, I think we would see it as not a good decision or unfavorable from the Supreme Court related to DEIB. But can you just talk a little bit more about psychological safety? How do you define that? Similar, different than how I positioned it, and then what are some kind of I guess best practices or tactics for employers, managers to foster more of that?
Psychological safety, I definitely agree with the definition that you used, and the only thing that I would add to it is making sure that it's coming from an empathetic point of view. Everyone shows up authentically very differently. And in order for people to feel safe, that also requires a couple of different things. What I require for psychological safety is different than what you require and what you require. And so, as a company, it's important that we figure out the baseline for psychological safety that we want to have, because there is undoubtedly going to be employees who still don't feel safe, and then we need to have a process in place. Well, what do we do when someone feels unsafe? How do we address that? Because it's impossible to be perfect when it comes to those types of very individual concepts, but we can make sure we've got processes in place to help people get to feeling safe if they're not.
So it sounds like one of the bigger opportunities for employers and managers is to have that conversation up front and establish that baseline you're saying
Mhm.
at an individual level.
Mhm.
Obviously, we're trying to kind of do that more in an aggregate, which
Mhm.
is challenging, like you said. But if you don't have that conversation sooner than later, right, you could be uh, wildly off in what you believe psychologically safe looks like
Mhm.
for your team. So that's helpful.
Yeah, I think the as you were saying, the empathetic and everyone shows up authentically. I still think we're working on that, even though authenticity is a core value of Digible. I think when someone's not psychologically safe, they don't really lean into that as much, perhaps, right? Because maybe whatever they're hiding. It's a John was talking about this. Again, I'm sorry to reference this too much on this recording since this audience didn't get to see John's presentation, but we'll have to have him back on for sure. We had him about maybe a year and a half ago. Anyways, but he was just saying that you need to feel comfortable being totally the same self at home and at work. Effectively, I'm paraphrasing.
Mhm.
And some people, I think, still, particularly when they start at Digital, sometimes they show up the first 3 months. They're way more dressed up, for example, than like later on, like 6 months in, people, are start to get way more casual because they just get more comfortable with what's accepted, right?
Mhm.
So to your point, Courtney, in a meeting, as I read up on psychological safety, it dawned on me that some people don't cannot in a live meeting disagree with something. They need basically over email or Slack or something. They that's where they're comfortable.
Mhm.
And a lot of times, at least the article I was reading on this part of psychological safety was saying a lot of times it's culturally related. So in different cultures, some folks, some cultures, it's just not typical to ever who's running the meeting is the one that gets to talk, and other people can't step in and talk. And now that may be a whole nation where that's the culture, but then we may have folks at Digital that relate to that where they now need to, and that's where I think Reid and I sometimes get tripped up, even with the groups that we're doing meetings with here at Digital, because we like to move quickly, as you were saying about your old company. And if it's like, okay, we have to say this, and now T minus 10 days, if you don't say anything within 10 days, it will go into effect. We are used to saying, hey, and this meeting's over. Now the to-dos have gone out. So now we've made that decision on fringe benefits and let's move forward. But that doesn't allow for the psychological safety if someone needs to do it in a written form versus
Mhm.
in a verbal. But also, that's back to your point about now what does Digital want to foster? Meetings are an integral part of how we operate here at Digital. So somehow we need to foster safety within those meetings, and
Mhm.
how to tool those people or train them up if that's not where they naturally lean, but get them to where they're more comfortable speaking up in those environments.
Yeah, I think that speaks to an individual's communication style. So if to speak to your point that there are definitely some cultural differences in how people communicate in groups or in social settings, but the the I guess, fear of speaking up or just not unwillingness to speak up in the meeting setting, there that could be a couple of different things. It could be maybe we need to work on public speaking, or it could just be you just need to process. And if they just need the time to process, then maybe we need to give them the space to do that. That's I don't know. I'm thinking through a couple of different options there, but the first thing that comes to mind is making sure that the first time someone speaks up that they're heard. so that way they don't feel shut down in future meetings. Because it's when you say that it's a lot of times specific to the company's culture, well, then that means there are either examples that they have been told about or that they've experienced themselves that make them feel like they cannot speak up in meetings. And so getting to the root of the issue and addressing it is really important.
That's a great call out. I actually just read an article over the weekend. I think it was in the Post, Washington Post, about negative childhood experiences versus positive childhood experiences, and they were just saying that for years we focused and recognized how damaging negative childhood experiences can be, because those are in many cases first impressions, just to your point, and then that scars them or shapes them, for the remainder of their lives, or certainly into adolescence, potentially early adulthood. And now science and research is saying you can offset, if not improve, the whole trajectory of a child by concentrating on, and it may seem obvious, but those positive childhood experiences. So really leaning in when they are putting themselves out there, whatever that behavior is. It's super effective to either neutralize or really set them on a better course. So I just saw the parallel to work. And it's like, hey, I just joined a Digible. I do have a few scars from this last company. I'm not sure how David's going to react when I challenge him or bring this up. And it's vital that, whether David fully understands it, appreciates it or not, is that, that how he responds is either going to create a negative employee experience or a positive one that could have a huge impact on, their level of psychological safety and engagement at the company. Not to steer you too much. I know you and I already had a fun conversation, and I believe you already read the book Drive by Daniel Pink. And I don't want to forget about DEIB. I really do want to come back to that. But categorically, we just covered psychological safety. We talked about benefits. He mentions autonomy. He mentions purpose. And he has mastery/flow. But categorically, what other elements or components do you think are vital for a great employee experience? And I'll just, David and I did riff on this on one of our podcasts, but what I appreciate about autonomy is, when people feel like they have more control, more authority of their responsibility, as long as they understand what the desired outcome is, they're far happier, more engaged, more productive. I'm seeing you shake your head. We do have this on video, so I'm going to assume you agree with that. You can either spend a little time there or tell me, are there other categories that you think are vital, like psychological safety, like autonomy, and even, I guess, where we started, which was the fringe benefits that really drive kind of world-class, I'll say, employee experience?
I'm gonna circle back to DEIV and say belonging.
Great.
If people feel like they belong in an organization, I've found that they are much more willing to invest in either improving their skill set or even self-identifying where they need to improve or make changes, rather than when they don't feel like they belong. It's much easier to identify, oh, well, I feel like no one likes me, or I'm not doing great, or my manager's being mean to me. When that sense of belonging is there, it impacts the employment experience exponentially.
I like it. It was reminding me, or it's making me think about what's in it for our audience. And quickly I jumped to like subcultures and how companies have different teams have different subcultures. So you have like maybe the intention of, whoever the founder of the property management company was. Then over time, the team gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And you have every property with the property manager has a different subculture of whatever the property management company is. And some companies are far better at championing the core values than others. Like Digible, we hit it every quarter. We go back through it with our entire staff. Whereas, Reid, could you remember even one of the core values over at Verizon?
Did they have core values?
That's what I'm saying. I don't know. I'm not sure. So I'm just
Make
saying,
as
like,
much money as you can.
the other companies I've
No,
been a
they're
part
not
of.
that evil, but yeah.
Yeah, I have no idea what any of their core values were.
Yeah.
And I remember, like, but as an employee or a prospective employee, when I was looking at companies and jobs to apply for, I'd go and read the about section and the mission statement, and if they had the core values, and it's important to me then. But then then I'm selected and I join the
Mhm.
company, and then I never hear about it again.
Mhm.
And so I'm just more pointing out, like, if you're at corporate, you need to like help make sure that this is important for every subculture to continue the core value of authenticity or what have you. And Nicole and I are reading this book right now. I forget the exact name of it, but it's called something like The Giant Hairball or something. But this guy had worked at Hallmark greeting cards for like 40 years, basically. And he wrote a book and illustrated it with how um, basically, like, as companies get bigger, they become, it's a bigger hairball.
Mhm.
And one of his experiences in the book is he worked for corporate, and it was just, it felt like all these systems and processes went into place, which just became really slowed things down and made nobody really happy. So everybody tried to get on this other team that was more about like almost like the rebel team. But he's like, but as that team grew, it became its own hairball. And so it was a hairball orbiting the other giant hairball of corporate Hallmark. And then he's like, different managers would try to would spin off and make their own hairballs. So the point is, where I'm going with this hairball thing and why it's made an impact on me is because I think oftentimes within an organization, and I could see you doing this, Reid, but like within DFM, you're like, okay, the culture is going to be this, but does that line up with the culture that DFM wanted as a whole? Or like, if I was a first time manager, I'd be like, well, I'm going to make this the promised land for this one little team, but that could become a wrecking ball in its own sense because it doesn't really fit into the culture, of the rest of the hairball. So anyway, so what's in it for our listeners is more of like just trying to be considerate and as consistent as you can, at least with those core values. I know just to finish this off, we've had certain teams as we got into EOS that made their own core values for their team.
Hmm.
And I loved the concept, but I was like, hang on now, you cannot totally get rid of the core values of the company. Because now if you're like, our core values are this, and then they disagree with that or they forget about that, you're creating a much bigger hairball, right? So it's almost like each team can add 3 core values or something to their team about what they want to exhibit, but these are the standard, you know, hairballs that you must maintain. It's kind of like the Constitution or whatever, like the Bill of
Mhm.
Rights of the U.S. versus like at the state level and county level.
Hmm. Yeah. I think that, like, for property management companies, their biggest, like, from my perspective as a former tenant, there was definitely a disconnect between each property. It didn't like I've worked with one property management company and just kind of moved to each of their properties, and there was definitely a different feeling depending on whoever the actual manager was of the community. So I think that that speaks to it perfectly. If there's consistency across the board from top down, then the experience that can be promoted in each site can be the same.
Well, I'm going to throw another one out at you. You've been so concise, so I have to keep going, Courtney, with your answers. Very eloquent, though. Um, Transparency,
Hmm.
and I think one of the first books you and I read together, or you referred to me, was Lost and Founder, and I want to say he said there's a very big difference between honesty and transparency. Um, you know, and transparency can be at your own discretion.
Hmm.
Honesty, it's kind of you're either honest or you're not, was part of what he got at there. But I feel like great employee experience and what we've seen at Digible is a great appreciation for financial transparency. How is the company actually performing?
Hmm.
That creates trust and awareness. And hopefully security if you're at a company that's doing well, and then also strategically. And that's something that I personally learned even here at Digital early on. As much as we feel like we communicate strategy and why we're doing what we're doing, it doesn't. You can't just check that box in a roundup or in a
Hmm.
quarterly planning meeting, which is one of the reasons we committed also just to exposure and relationships to virtual coffees, meetups with employees, so that we give them room to ask those types of questions if it isn't clear to them. But would you agree that that's one of those categories that can be a huge win or a huge loss
Hmm.
when it comes to employee experience? Understanding, better the decision making, the strategy
Hmm.
of a company, as well as the financials.
Yeah, I think the second piece of the transparency with financials or anything that's shared is confirming understanding from the employee population and making sure like they have the tools like Saveology or whatever could be used to give them more context depending on what understanding they're starting with and what understanding we want them to get to.
There she goes again. Eloquent but concise. So I don't know if you have a comment on this because I know you're big on the transparency too. So I'll let you if you want. And then I wanted to use that as a springboard into something related to transparency, but isn't totally the same, that I also think can be really valuable as far as the employee experience.
Not too much to add, just more back when I, and Nicole were talking about being transparent with the financials. We decided to do it in good times and in bad times. And it was more because for me personally, I didn't want to have to keep track, almost like politics, of like what can be shared, what can't be shared. Also, I didn't want someone ever feeling surprised by like, oh shoot, Digible is out of money, or like, how come they don't offer free trips to Aruba? It's like, well, because you've seen the financials, right? And so we started that when times were bad. So I think we built a lot of credibility with the staff back then versus now when times are good. And then we committed saying, even if times get bad again, we're still going to be showing those numbers. And you then sort of added to that and do a strategic brief every year that shows, hey, here's, along with all the stuff we share with the vision and traction organizer via EOS, you are also like giving commentary, like an FAQ about why are we doing what we're doing. That way they can at least understand why decisions are made versus feeling surprised. So the resources are there. Now, I'm sure they don't, like
read that every week.
well, I'm sure they don't internalize it. I mean, we even struggle with like the management team that's more involved in a lot of those decisions, where they struggle to connect all the dots. And even on the executive team, we can sometimes get tripped up about, don't forget, yada yada. So for anyone, far removed, it's like the reverse of I was going to say the 6 degrees is Kevin Bacon, but it's just a longer game of telephone, right? And so at least though they have access to the materials where they could go and hunt it down and figure it out if they want as best they can.
Yeah, totally. Well, you had offered some good role models, which is what we're trying to be. But Buffer was one of the ones that you pointed to early, just the level of transparency they had. And I think that creates a lot of camaraderie and unity as well, where it's like we feel like we really are part of this all the way through, not just on the periphery or, employees. That we're all in this together, and you should share, right? If that's the spirit of the culture. Great game. So I didn't know if you might bring this up, but they point to how important success is, understanding success, knowing if you're winning or losing. I ask this a lot in interviews just to find out, hey, from your last job, did you know month to month, week to week, whether you're winning or losing, and what did that look like? And a lot of times you get blank stares, or no, I didn't really know that. Outside of sales, which is so obvious, you get paid on it, whether you're winning or losing. It's not as easy as you might expect. I think people generally, will say, well, my boss seems happy with me, so things must be going pretty well. But the great game that David and I have read, I don't know if you've read that one, Courtney, but it talks about, that everybody has a number, and we're obviously employing that same approach here. Great game, as well as EOS, our company framework suggests this. And part of that's accountability, but to me, it's also like a good employee experience, so that I know, and I can feel good in a given week or in a given month that I'm contributing. Great game takes it even a step further, just to say, hey, I'll use Bailey, our dear Bailey, one of our first 10 maybe employees. It was first 15. But what her role in SEO means to the company. Like, could we help really capture that for her? Because then it's not, I just have a number, but I actually know, the output, the work that I do, the gross margin that creates, et cetera, all drives towards, this bigger picture, and I think that's something you have to count on with your managers. Like David and I can't get that granular, but that's what we're aiming for. So any comments on, how that can contribute or does, I guess beyond what I've already laid out, how valuable do you think that is as far as the employee experience, knowing, what contribution you're making to the bigger picture? And
I think it's incredibly valuable because if the part of the employee experience that I think is missing from a lot of today's companies is people's ability to tell that story exactly. What is my contribution? What is my impact beyond just I've entered the number on the spreadsheet and sent it along. Well, what is it doing when it gets to the destination? What is the overall big picture? And if people can tell that story, then that has a lot of impact on some people's identity. To the point, I know we keep bringing up the DEIB training, but to John's point about how different people value different aspects of their personality, if it's really important for someone to be a top performer and they don't have a way to track that, if the information or the measurables are not available for them to access whenever they want to, then that's an important aspect of their identity that they have no autonomy over. They've got to go to their manager to ask for that every time. So I think it's really important to not only set clear expectations and define success, but also give people access to figure out where they are in real time.
Well, we've got to start to wrap this up. But I just to build on what Reid was saying, um, I I don't know what I'm putting you a little bit on the spot here, Courtney, but I think we've talked about this. When I view employee experience as your role, as I've thought more about it, about what should your like how is Courtney winning or losing? And the number I come up with is the number of people in the right seats. So what percentage of the company is in the seat that they're made for?
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know what the baseline is, but at least 90% should be our goal. Like I feel like closer to I mean, really, you almost like you want 100% of people in the right seats, but let's be realistic and let's say somewhere 90 to 95%. And I mention that because it's very your role almost as much of as any role is really hard to quantify if you're doing a great job or not doing a great job. And so, but when you think about an employee experience, if someone's in the wrong seat, they're probably not having a great experience because they're probably not like winning, as Reid's saying.
Mm-hmm.
And if they're not winning, it's really hard for them to have confidence and be happy. And the company's then not really happy with them either. So that's the number I keep coming back to is it's got to be percentage of people in the right seats. So feel free to comment on that. But
Hmm.
yeah.
I think
But
that's
who determines that? Because we may think somebody's in the right seats, but we don't fully, I guess, recognize, what's going on in their head, right? Like, is it self-reported? So I'm just taking this a step further that you would say that's how we're going to measure that, whether we have the right butts in the right seats. Because you can look at productivity, for example, and say, man, that person's crushing it, but they're actually not in the right seat. They're not as happy. So would you say it's a combination of the two? Like, how would you operationalize that?
Well, I think that's part of Courtney's role. She's got to determine because earlier she was saying it's the manager's role to basically communicate the value of the benefits. I would have thought that that's her role, but it all applies together. So whether Courtney wants to be doing assessments or if she wants to, I mean, the easiest way to operationalize it is to go to the manager because we require managers to do the EOS, GWC, and
mm-hmm.
core value fit every quarter. So if someone's not yeses on all of that, the GWC and the value fit, then that's clearly they're not in the right seat. So that's like the simple way. Now, if she wants to get more sophisticated over time and have some other assessment or whatever, that's fine. But I think like perfect is the enemy in this case, and just saying because I don't know, like I have no idea like what, but I could tell you we're not 100% right now as far as what our number is. That's as much as I that's as far as I could go. So at least having that tabulated is a good place for her to start, and then from there, it applies to are we showing the right value of these benefits? Are we attracting the right kind of talent? Do people know what, as you're saying, Reid, success looks like in their role? Yada, yada, yada. So it wraps it all together in my mind.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that's a good measure. I think that it would definitely be a goal that we'd have to back into and again define what the right seat is and then what action that we take when someone's not in the right seat. But I do think that that is a good measure as far as figuring out whether your employee experience or people operations department is actually being effective.
All right. Well, anything else you want to cover, Courtney, before we let you get out of here today?
Um, no, nothing off the top of my head.
Okay.
Well, what I was going to talk about related to strategy and transparency is goals.
Hmm.
And I think these all connect, obviously. But making this maybe a little more relevant for property management, like the property management universe, are all the employees on site and kind of back office, front office clear on what the goals are? And I would suspect that uh, there's room for opportunity there. And when you say, David, in the industry, because even when you and I talk, depending on who we're talking to within those different personas at a property management company, you hear different
Hmm.
responses. Is it NOI? Which some don't even know what that stands for. Is it, just gross revenue? And I'm making this maybe too much. I don't want to about just financial metrics, but hopefully there are goals beyond just those
Hmm.
financial metrics. But if you have like the marketer versus the property manager versus the maintenance man versus the COO not aligned there, then it can't be a great employee experience, and you're going to have some conflict,
Hmm.
most likely, as far as happiness and all the things that we're talking about. So I just think that that's a big opportunity from what I can tell in the industry, is make it clear and hopefully aligned on every level, every persona, what the goals of that property management company are, and you'll see a better, happier employee.
Yeah, and that's a tall order, big effort. But back to Great Game of Business, that system, they do say at least do once a quarter and communicate what the goals are. So even if you're a property manager at one location, you can say, "Hey, folks, the number we're really looking to improve this quarter is uh, the number of missed calls. Like
Hmm.
we want to pick up that phone 80% of the time, it's a 60% of the time right now. And that's what we're focused on right now. That may change next quarter. And then that way you're giving permission that you don't have it all figured out. As if like you can't go out there and say like, in perpetuity, we only care about this thing because now later you're going to care about something else too.
Mhm.
So just it's a great little system to talk about how it's okay to change it and how to communicate it. And don't let the staff feel like you're moving the goalpost on them. Like once they hit their 80% answer rate, that now you're going to go hammer them on something else because you can start to demotivate the folks if you take that approach.
Yeah, and definitely, in addition to communicating the expectations, making sure people understand how they can help in their position to meet that goal.
Hmm.
Like even as just a leasing agent or a property assistant property manager. Well, what specifically can you do to help us reach this goal? Like, what are your expectations for this quarter? I think that's really
100%.
important.
Well, we never like, fully got to unpack the DEIB, and I think it makes a lot of sense. This is me trying to goad people to keep listening, or listen to the next few podcasts. But I would love to have John back on, like you said, and have Courtney part of that conversation too, and we can really get more into it. And obviously, he's an attorney, so I'm sure he has plenty of
Yeah.
knowledge and thoughts about some of the recent legislation related to this. But yeah, Courtney, really appreciate it. We're so happy to have you here. I feel like we already have you know, this sounds funny, but BC, meaning before Courtney versus after Courtney. But yeah, just been a breath of fresh air and all sorts of great knowledge and terrific at helping already shape, our employee experience. So thank you.
Happy to be here. It's super exciting to be here. I've never felt like I belonged anywhere else more than I belong here. So,
Oh, hey,
That's
you got
awesome.
something right.
Yeah, maybe we should just shut down the podcast.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know if it gets better than
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you, Courtney.
thank you.